Thank you, Fiona. Thank you to all of you, to the organizers who did the work to pull this event off and get all of you in this room at this time on a beautiful fall day. It's really, it's inspiring to find ourselves in a community like this, like a room full of people who are actively working to change, to change the terms of trade, to change the food system, not only on the campus here, but in the surrounding community in the world. And this is the kind of people we want to rub up against every day. And so we're out on the prowl, and this is what we do. So what we're going to cover here in a minute is first a little bit of equal exchange. What brought us into being, and what were the aspirations of the founders? What did they discover when they soberly began this initiative? And then a little bit of an assessment of what do we think we've accomplished in all these years. And then we wanted to open it up and give you a chance to vote, for like that last half hour or 45 minutes on if we were to go deeper on like one or two topics. We're going to throw a few out there and let just through a show of hands, let people vote on which ones we talk about. And I might call an audible and add one more thing to that at the end when the time comes. Okay, so it was 26 years ago that Equal Exchange was founded, and it was started by so it was 1986. It was started by three guys who worked here in New England in the New England food co-op distribution world. I'm not one of the founders. I've been there about 16 years. But so this was 1986, and so they were young, idealistic, and it was interesting that even in working in food co-ops, especially when it came to products from overseas, they had no idea, no clue really where stuff came from or the conditions under which it was sourced, whether it was rice or tea or coffee or bananas or cacao. And so they were curious, and so they weren't able to carry out the vision, the exploration within the food co-op, so they jumped off the proverbial cliff and decided to go off on their own and start a business. Let's start out by looking at when they started and they began to look at what was the landscape out there, especially thinking of food products from overseas. What did they find? For sure, they found that very prevalent was chronic poverty, and just people, whether they were day laborers or small farmers, completely disempowered and outside the system, and they found real hunger in many areas. They found market failure, right? A system that was run on the motivation of generating profits, and which rarely, if ever, took into account as a priority human need or fairness. They discovered production and distribution in the global South was dominated by a handful of huge landowners who controlled everything from the ground up through the export, that migrant workers, kind of like here, were disenfranchised, marginalized, and small-scale producers who maybe had their own little plot of land were unable to access the market. They also found the nature of production in almost every crop was prevalent was the destructive use of chemical-intensive agriculture, right? And here we go into especially through a series of more so quirks of fate, we ended up focusing on coffee heavily in the opening round. That wasn't the intent, but a few things came into pass so that we did. And so when they looked at cultivation and chemical-intensive agriculture, they just found the destruction and the havoc that it can wreak, because coffee was originally grown traditionally under the canopy of the forest, right? And there was several layers of different kinds of trees, and there was a whole diversity of production. And so there, with certain perverted incentives from governments and aid programs and the World Bank, they wanted to get much, as a way to get more foreign exchange into the hands of these countries, they wanted to get much more higher yields per hectare. And so they, in many cases, just chopped down the rainforest and planted coffee to the point where it looked like corn in Nebraska, just like wide open, exposed to the sun. The way they had to develop special hybrids so that they could withstand the direct sun. And to make all that work, like agriculture, monoculture, anywhere, it requires intensive chemicals and intensive fertilizers and stuff like that. It's amazing when you go to a farm like that versus what we'll see later. You can't even hear or see a bird. There's just no such thing even as a songbird. Whereas you go into shade-grown areas, like it's completely different. In the north, they found in the global north, right, that the food system, as you guys well know, is dominated, and as Fiona alluded to, by a handful of conglomerates. There's been an enormous consolidation in the food system, and that has shaped policy and even consumption. It's shaped consumption by the disproportionate influence they have over which products receive a subsidy and who receives subsidies, so that you see things like the food pyramid, which says eat all this good stuff and not so much the other stuff, and then you see where the subsidies go, and they reward the bad stuff so that they make the wrong kind of foods really cheap. And when you make the wrong kind of foods really cheap, that is going to shape consumption patterns in this country. They also found, and they kind of knew this because this was their own experience, disengaged, uninformed consumers who often, in a way, were deliberately kept in the dark because the production, especially when you get into the animal side, was pretty nasty. But people were, unlike generations past, were very disconnected from where their food came from. And I was mentioning to Evan a little earlier, like if you ask most people still in this country, like, where's your food come from? And the answer is the supermarket. Bad answer. So that's a pretty bleak landscape that they're confronting, right? And everything about it seemed upside down and wrong, and the priorities in the wrong place. And so when they found such extreme examples of structurally and economically and socially what was wrong, they really did believe that a radical response was required to counter that. And they had to actually come up with an alternative that could be viable and could demonstrate through our success the viability of a more sustainable and equitable food system. So what is that vision for a better world, a better food system? What does that look like? In the South, there had to be a way for small farmers to get into the game, to get into the system. And as long as people were just individual farmers with a very small plot of land, it was impossible to access people like you and me, consumers in the North. And so through different histories in different countries, some more successful than others, farmers were encouraged to form cooperatives, to band together to gain both democracy and an internal say, but also economies of scale and potential access to credit and things like that, to access the market in a way that they'd been iced out of traditionally. Part of this involved direct trading relationships, and this meant instead of going through a series of middlemen, each taking their own little bite out of the system, finding a way to sell directly to importers or consumers, ideally. The most direct would be some farmer in Nicaragua selling to you, so that's kind of not that practical in most situations. So what's the next best thing? So, one-stop shopping, selling to someone like us, and then we get it to you. But carving out, the role of the intermediaries who suck money out of the system that should rightfully end up closer to the ground. Okay. So now these are some of the underpinnings for what wasn't known really at the time far and wide as fair trade, later became known as fair trade. It was a set of practices and principles that then took on in this country the name fair trade. And this was at a time well before even the term free trade had entered the American dialogue. You weren't hearing about free trade in 1986. And here these guys are leapfrogging over this and saying, we need to have a vision for something that's called fair trade. And so some of the key components of fair trade include higher, more stable prices. On this graph, you'll see, this is like coffee and cacao. This would be emblematic of both of those, which are commodities, traded in New York and in London. And so often through both supply, demand, but more often than that, even speculation and hedging, the prices swing wildly, and more often they're low, and farmers are price takers. And you can see the fair trade, the black line on the top is like fair traders set a minimum. No matter how low the market might go, here's how much we're paying per pound for a pound of coffee. And then when the market happens to go up, we're going to make sure we stay above that all the time. But at least there's a security blanket. It is not going down. And in a way, this is one of the many ways that fair trade brings back in the externalities that most businesses would prefer to slough off on society. Like, okay, let's keep them poor, let's pollute the land. We hear about kind of pollution as being one of the major externalities. But fair trade does its best to incorporate that and engage consumers to understand what that is and to know what really are the true costs of production and from where things are coming from. Credit, huge. Like agriculture anywhere, here in the US, for sure, but it's an agricultural product takes a while to plant, to cultivate, to grow. There's risk, there's weather, there's whatever. And they really are dependent on being able to get access to credit before the harvest comes in. People see almost an equivalent locally here sometimes of CSAs, right? Community Supported Agriculture, where they'll get people signing up. And maybe some people here are. Anybody here a member of a CSA around here? Yeah, okay. And you're paying your share up front. Direct and long-term trading partnerships. This is another one which is really important, again, because there's so much speculation and there's so many traditional businesses are involved in the race to the bottom, just constantly looking for the cheapest thing they can find around the globe to then be able to turn it around and mark it up just as high as the market will possibly bear. What we do, and people like us, is commit to these organized groups of farmers, the cooperatives, to be with them for the long haul, so that if we get one shipment that doesn't hit a quality spec, it's not game over, we're moving over to the next valley and finding someone who can deliver. The quality has to be good or else it's not going to fly. Absolutely. Like, I'm not going to buy a bunch of coffee or chocolate or something out of solidarity more than about twice. If the quality isn't there, it has to be good. So we can't just accept anything. But the point of being committed to the long-term relationship is to work with producers to make the improvements necessary to make those businesses viable. And it takes a while, and it takes a heck of a lot of patience. Here's a huge one, support for organic agriculture. And this takes many forms. As I said earlier, the one reason there was incentives to chop down the trees and plant open sun coffee was to get higher yields per hectare. So then you go back and you do organic, and organic isn't a direct correlation to, but it's a pretty close proxy for shade grown. the yields, the productivity per hectare or per acre is significantly lower. And what is going to incentivize a farmer besides health and wanting to not poison their, their water and their land and their themselves? Economically, really, what's going to incentivize someone to stick with that kind of production? It has to be rewarded in the market. And even though everyone who shops and buys organic food, you do pay a premium. You pay more for organic than for conventional. Often still, based on low yields, the differential isn't enough to incentivize someone staying in organic. It can be that hard. And so people like us have to really engage. And one of the things we're doing now is putting a whole new focus on productivity and getting organic fertilizers and compost in close, developed and made in close proximity to farms so that they can be used and people can actually see higher yields. And there's a lot of obstacles in the way. It sounds kind of simple. You come in, they use a lot of the byproducts from the coffee bean and stuff, making compost, but there's a whole lot to it. And so it's one of the commitments that we make. There's another element of organic production. We have a slide here of a whole of a side of a hill washed out. There we go. Where, again, if you don't have trees, not only shading, the coffee plants, but holding hillsides together, when you see some extreme weather, which we're seeing more and more of now, especially with climate change and just the extremes of weather we're seeing whole mountains and hillsides washed out because there's nothing holding them together. And so organic, again, it's a pretty close proxy of organic and shade grown. By definition, you are building a more viable, healthy, more rigorous landscape and soil base with less erosion and everything that goes along with that. What's next you got there? Okay, so then beyond organic, there's a whole, what's this vision of a better way to do it than the bleak scenario I described earlier? There's advocacy on behalf of small producers within the industry. This here happens to be an example of something that we did a few months ago. We took out a full-page ad in the Burlington Free Press challenging Green Mountain Coffee to do better. There's some real controversy raging in the fair trade certification world, which we might touch on later if people vote for it or not. And we wanted to challenge Green Mountain, which is a pretty good company and has done some good stuff, to take a second look at the certification agency they were sticking with that we believe has perverted the original intent of what this is all about. But that's another story. But it's an example of advocating on behalf of the interests of who we work with. There's advocacy in the community and with networks within other constituencies. So we do a lot of that with like relief and development organizations, often affiliated with congregations such as the Lutherans. We've been working with Lutheran World Relief for a long time, for like 15 years. USFT, United Students for Fair Trade. It's just like sharing information, being present, and helping bring, farmer stories to them. And speaking of that, that's huge. How do you help connect consumers who really are disconnected to where stuff comes from with the reality on the ground of where the food's coming from, and then obviously present people with an opportunity to choose product A over product B. But what we do, and we can only be like second or third hand, we travel to source a lot. We do get information, we take pictures, we do interviews, and we use as much integrity as we possibly can to convey the reality on the ground in those places so that consumers get it. And we've put a premium on engaging and educating people from the very, very beginning, whether it's at the point of sale in a store where you'll find our stuff, whether it's on the package, whether it's on the website. But it's really not an afterthought. The whole engaging comes with part of our it's one of the unique aspects of our business model. It's kind of like, are you guys an NGO? Are you a nonprofit? Like, you're kind of everywhere you're doing this stuff, and it's doing a lot of education, right? But it's, no, we're a hybrid business, but this is part of the package. We have to do it. And then internally, one of the things that's most rare, and I would have loved to spawn more copycats by now in year 26, and that's, this was one of the aspirations of the founders too. They wanted to build an organization that if it was going to be successful, it had to be successful at a whole lot of levels, not just changing the terms of trade, not merely reforming international trade, not merely engaging consumers, but also actually doing it in a way that reflected their values internally, like building a democratic and participatory business internally. And for us, this took the form of a worker-owned cooperative business, whereby everyone who is hired at Equal Exchange works, and after their 1 full year, they're voted on by other members of the co-op, voted into the cooperative. And so that, like, the co-director with me is one of the founders, been there 26 years. I've been there 16, Rodney's been there about 18 or so. Someone comes in tomorrow in any job, a management job, a warehouse job, a coffee roaster. 1 year from now, they're going to have the exact same, literally the exact same stake in Equal Exchange that I have. And if there's profits to be shared at the end of the year, which in co-op speak we call patronage rebates, that's all distributed equally on a per capita basis. So you see some of these principles behind what we're doing, right? At Equal Exchange, we have a pay ratio, right? In this country, the average, sort of CEO, the highest to lowest, is somewhere around 400 or 500 to 1. And at Equal Exchange, it's 4 to 1. It's actually not even, but that's the most. That's the most it could be. The other thing is what we call the poison pill. Like, we can't be sold. It's amazing. I don't even really say this too far and wide in Equal Exchanges because whatever, but I would say between Rink and I, pop quiz for Rodney if you knew this, I would say that between Rink, he's the co-founder, co-director with me. Between us, I would say at least once a week, either by phone or by sort of anonymous letter, there's an offer to buy us. Like, that's just kind of how it works. You develop some value, and then you sell, and you make your money in some larger corporate whatever or group of investors, Bain types, sorry, we'll want to make money off it. And at Equal Exchange, that can't happen. Because the poison pill this is right in the bylaws, this is in the DNA, right? If Equal Exchange were to sell, after paying back lenders, investors to Equal Exchange, we'll talk about in a second, worker owners paying all their bills, whatever's left has to get dissolved and donated. The value of whatever's left has to get donated to fair trade and to advance the cause of fair trade. So there's not a heck of a lot of incentive for us to open these envelopes or respond to these phone calls. I'm kind of curious what we would be valued at, but I don't want to go down that path. And then on the investor piece, we do have a role. This is really huge. We have an appropriate, balanced role for outside investors at Equal Exchange. Like, we have about 480 investors who have put in nearly $10 million. And we love them dearly. And they have a seat at the table. Farmers, worker owners, customers, investors, and we're all stakeholders in this journey. And they have no vote. They can't vote for the board of directors at Equal Exchange. We're a worker-owned cooperative business. We love them. They can have access to, to me, access to our financials, all that stuff. We definitely take their ideas. but they do not, like most investors, have disproportionate influence over the decisions, more often than not, short-term oriented decisions that businesses make. And okay, and so we'll talk about what about, how's that work? How's that all work? In fact, let's go there now. How does that sound? Like more democracy for producers, more democracy internally, a more clean food system without the chemicals, all this stuff, consumers who are enlightened, they're, like, they know what they're buying, there's no bait and switch. Has it worked? The answer is yes. And I'm going to say the answer is it has worked for all the stakeholders involved, and that's the exciting part. That's the part that's exciting, just being here, in year 26, saying it's working. You actually can do it. You can work in the market. You can do commerce. You can be in the system, challenging it every step of the way, but demonstrating that there is another way to conduct business. When we say it worked, there is kind of a yes, but thing there, right? It took sweat for a long time. In the early years, we were ridiculed by the specialty coffee industry. Like, the first 10 years was like, you can't pay small farmers above the world price on a commodity and expect to compete in retail. You can't do it. It's a bad idea. You will fail. And they definitely hoped we would fail and not be around to keep agitating and raising these issues. And so through a lot of sweat and trial and error and learning, Spanish, learning what coffee was, how to make quality coffee, how to sell, how to take rejection, how to do good customer service, fix machines, raise the capital, make it all happen. After the first 10 or 11 years, you can see reflected in the earliest years of our coffee volume, it just started to hit takeoff in about year 12 or so, something like that, right? It was kind of like holding popcorn over the fire. It's kind of shaking that, before microwaves, shaking kernels of corn over a fire, just waiting, pushing, shaking it up, literally shaking it up. And then it started to pop. And then suddenly, whoa, all sorts of people were taking a look like, God, it actually looks like some number of consumers actually care about some of these things. Maybe we should try to get in on the game. So then you see the last, 10 or 12 years. This is, again, this goes beyond equal exchange, but to other players now as well. It's really jumped in volume. And so it took a while. Like, the big corporations aren't willing to do the spade work, aren't willing to take the risks and do all the hard work to get there. But once something looks kind of viable, they are right there willing to join in. And so now we have, the whole fair trade world has included and invited bigger players. And some of the bigger players, I would say, have entered with integrity. And I mentioned Green Mountain, we're challenging them to do better. But I'm going to say Green Mountain is one of the big players that has entered this world, this fair trade world, with integrity. Others have entered it more as a marketing opportunity. Like, okay, what's the latest thing people like? Okay, we did organic, some fair trade that people need. Hey, can you drum up a fair trade option so we can say we got that too? Yeah, fair trade. Yeah, we got that. So there's some people who is purely opportunistically are in this, and in many ways they've tried to water it down the minute they got in. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So then you go to our own sales. Is that what we have next? Yeah, so our own sales have grown. So again, we live with this duality, this need to succeed and grow as equal exchange and not just be a sacrificial lamb and say, here's how it kind of works, but we don't need to actually make a profit each year and be around to finish the story tomorrow. We have to be there for us, for our farmers, for the worker owners, for kind of to maintain the gold standard, if you want to use that kind of language. But we also want to demonstrate that this is viable in the marketplace to succeed as a business doing it this way. And so this slide shows that, yeah, at the equal exchange level, sales have grown. It took a long time. 10 years ago, that was year 16, we hit 10 million. 3 years later, we hit 20 million, and next year we'll hit 50 million. We have achieved, I think, for investors, modest, steady returns. We have averaged a 5% dividend for 20 years in a row. We commit that we will aim for, it's our intent to pay 5% dividends at the end of each year. And in fact, we've averaged just over that for 20 years in a row. So there's something about this model that works for people. And it wasn't always that way, but that's a whole other story. This here, it looks at a comparison of equal exchange over a 10-year period, 2001 to 2011 versus the S&P. So again, we kind of look at the tortoise and the hare. We're the tortoise, not all that sexy, but and we never lead with like, and you get a financial bang. We lead with, here's the social return you get when you invest in equal exchange. You're investing for the social return, and we're going to get you some dividends as well. But if that's what you're fixated on, better look elsewhere. But in fact, we exceeded the S&P over that 10-year period. Like, oh, okay. So it's real. Maybe I'll stop there. So thank you very much for coming and for your questions.